Hey guys! So, Secrets of Dumbledore has now come out, and they've attempted to give us some good answers to questions that we've had since Crimes of Grindelwald. Namely, who is Credence and how is he connected to the Dumbledores? But this movie also introduces us to plenty of new forms of magic. We see some cool items that Dumbledore has handed out to the main group, and we see multiple forms of weird pocket dimensions that we've never seen before. But what this movie failed in doing is explaining the biggest MacGuffin from the previous movie. The Blood Pact. And while giving this item way more power than it previously had, it fails to explain how these powers work and why it was eventually destroyed. But don't worry, because I'm about to explain all of that in this video. Here we go! So the Blood Pact is reintroduced to us in the beginning of Secrets of Dumbledore, an item that was first brought up in Crimes of Grindelwald and has basically had no explanation until now. But bizarrely, when they introduce us to the Blood Pact in this movie, they pretty much give us no specific explanation for it. All we find out from Dumbledore when he describes the Blood Pact to Theseus and Newt is that the Blood Pact is a form of young man's magic that he created with Grindelwald. The Blood Pact stops Dumbledore from acting against Grindelwald, and if he even thinks about betraying him, if the thought of undermining Grindelwald even comes across his heart, the Blood Pact will go out of its way to kill him. And most notably, he ends this description of the Blood Pact by saying that it can't be undone. And yet this immediately creates a paradox, because at the end of this movie, this Blood Pact will be destroyed. Not to mention the obvious secondary effect where the entire movie he is undermining Grindelwald, and yet the Blood Pact does not choose to kill him. And lastly, this Blood Pact seems to also be creating its own tiny pocket dimension that Grindelwald and Dumbledore have been using to communicate, and even at the end of this movie, they seem to be having a duel within this dimension. And that's quite a few things that is left completely underexplained. But I guess I can't complain about that, because if they explained it, then what would I be doing? So what gives? And I have a very simple explanation that can actually answer all three of these points. Souls. Yes, I've talked about this exact idea before in a previous video about how Dumbledore and Grindelwald actually created the Blood Pact. See, we don't have that much experience of blood magic inside of the universe of Harry Potter, and the few examples we have of blood magic being used don't really explain what the Blood Pact is doing in this movie. But soul magic completely does. See, I talked about this more in my previous video, but basically the construction of the Blood Pact is more than just simply their blood meeting together and creating this object. It goes deeper, in fact connects their very souls together, possibly leveraging the damage to both of their souls that was done when Ariana died. Now this of course assumes that the Blood Pact was created after Ariana died, which creates a small problem in the canon because Deathly Hallows told us that Dumbledore and Grindelwald never met between the time that Ariana died and their duel in 1945. But I think it's safe to say that as of Secrets of Dumbledore, this rule has been thrown out, because at the end of this movie, we definitively see Grindelwald and Dumbledore at the same location. And so we're taking some distinct creative licenses as to what them meeting actually entails. But the truth is that if their souls are both tied together in this object, it could basically explain every magical property we've seen of this object in this movie. Firstly, let's take the principle that Dumbledore gives us early on, that if Dumbledore plans on betraying Grindelwald, the Blood Pact will somehow know and try to kill him. In every instance of using blood that we've ever seen, whether it be unicorn blood in Philosopher's Stone or Harry's blood in Goblet of Fire, the blood never has any sort of sentience to it or any real connection to the creature it was taken from. But if their souls are actually tethered to the object, then that gives us a direct insight between their minds and the object. Because we have countless examples in the Harry Potter series of Harry's soul and Voldemort's soul being tied together, and how Harry and Voldemort both have the ability to enter each other's minds because of it. Which leads directly to point number 2, the weird world and communication form that the Blood Pact offers Grindelwald and Dumbledore. And so we only see it twice in this movie, once at the very beginning when Grindelwald and Dumbledore are recapping what happened in Crimes of Grindelwald, and once at the very end when Dumbledore and Grindelwald are dueling, which they shouldn't do for another 13 years, but whatever. And while this just being an object, a physical manifestation of an unbreakable vow, doesn't really offer us any explanation to how it works as a communication device, an object that contains both their souls, or at least has both of their souls tied to it, fully explains why they can use it as a communication device. Because, as I mentioned before, Voldemort's soul being in Harry allows Harry to temporarily enter Voldemort's mind and vice versa. And so if both of their souls are connected to this object, both of their minds would also be able to enter that object and create this kind of mind world for themselves inside of it. And while this is kind of adding something to the Harry Potter magic that we haven't seen before, there is a distinct precedent, because we see a different interpretation of the soul world in Deathly Hallows, where Harry's soul basically creates a world around itself after he is temporarily killed by Voldemort. And there are distinct similarities between this world at the end of Deathly Hallows and the world we're seeing in Secrets of Dumbledore. Most notably, they're both really white, they're both very bright, and they're kind of blurry at times. And so the weird world that we're seeing in Secrets of Dumbledore is probably just another extension of that. In fact, Grindelwald even brings up that this is something Dumbledore's created because it's one of Dumbledore's favorite tea shops. Very similar to how Harry creates King's Cross, because that is a place that he really identifies with as a place that involves moving from one world to another. And lastly, the ending of this very movie. Probably the least explained part of this entire movie, where at the very end, the Blood Pact is actually broken. Or I guess I should be calling it Blood Troth now, but meh. And we are given pretty much no explanation to how this is broken, especially since at the beginning of this movie, we found out that it couldn't be undone. And the explanation that Dumbledore gives us within this movie is that it's broken because Grindelwald sought to attack and Dumbledore sought to defend. Which is somehow even vaguer than Dumbledore explaining this Blood Pact at the beginning of the movie. But if the foundation of this Blood Pact is on Dumbledore and Grindelwald's souls, this kind of explains it. Because as I talked about before, the damage done to Dumbledore's soul is entirely within his own mind. Dumbledore's soul is damaged because he believes that he is responsible for Ariana's death. But he has to learn how to let go of that and believe that he is actually worthy.
I'm still worthy.
Dumbledore really is the one who has to absolve himself of this guilt. And the events immediately leading up to the destruction of the Blood Pact really do reinforce this, where immediately before he defends Credence, Dumbledore has the Chillin bow to him, acknowledging that there is good in Dumbledore's soul. And with this immediately followed up by Dumbledore doing the right thing and defending Credence, it can be seen that Dumbledore has finally redeemed himself in his own eyes and is able to put his soul back together. Which, if souls are in fact the fundamental foundation to this magical object itself, removing half of that foundation would simply cause it to crumble, which is exactly what we see at the ending of this movie. And there we have it, a very concrete reason to why the Blood Pact is actually destroyed at the end of Secrets of Dumbledore. It's not simply a matter of Dumbledore choosing to defend, but it's something much deeper than that. It's Dumbledore finally being able to forgive himself for what happened to his sister more than 30 years ago, and thereby being able to put his soul back together and move on. But guys, that's just what I'm thinking. Do you guys think that this explanation sufficiently explains the end of Secrets of Dumbledore? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.